Hello and welcome back. My name's Spencer. This is My Time with Lynn, episode 6. Very special guest, Luc Trudel from our Montreal office. Hello, Luc.
Hey, how's it going, Spencer?
Very well. Yeah,
I'm very excited to be here.
awesome. I'm glad. We'll start a discussion in just a moment. I wanted to address an issue from our mailbag. So this is, again, I put my email on just about every video. I think I forgot one of them. But spencer.n.cross@gmail.com. Feel free to email me your thoughts, concerns, etc. We had a comment on our last video, episode 5, with George Rogers. And George, in that video, towards the end, he recounted a story involving one of our national spokespeople who was asked a question at an event. The question was something akin to, and you all can watch the video if you want to see the exact discussion there, but someone asked a question to our one of our national spokespeople to say, "Hey, this economic plan you're describing, it sounds kind of like National Socialism." And this organizer responded with, "Well, yeah, but it's gonna be National Socialism done right." And I meant to address in the video, I didn't. The discussion kind of went away from it, and I forgot. I was going to push back on George a little bit about that comment because, nowhere in my time, 13 years with the group, did we ever come close to advocating for National Socialism because that's commonly associated with the Nazi Party in Germany in the 30s and 40s, right? And even before that. So, you know, maybe George was a little bit confused. I mean, I did talk to him about it. He said that it was in a joking context, right? Like that you know that organizer would never have said that, like, oh yeah, we want National Socialism, right? It could have been something more like statism, which just means like the government directing the economy, right? Something like that. So just to and 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 George, I spoke to them about this. He didn't mean to like sort of besmirch the organizer in that way. So just want to clean that up a little bit. Um, and because I don't want to leave that hanging, right? But I also don't want to cut it from the video or take it down or something. If you guys see that, hopefully, if you watched episode 5, you'll watch episode 6, this one right now. So that's all I have to say on that. But yeah, feel free, spencer.n.cross@gmail. I'll put it right here. Feel free to send in questions, comments if you'd like to be on the show. In this case, Mr. Trudel, he just reached out via email. We weren't in touch otherwise, and he said, "Hey, I'd like to come on." I'm like, okay, let's do it. So, yes, here to talk with Luc. And so, Luc, if you could give a little bit of introduction for yourself, and maybe start with how you came across the organization.
Right. That's probably the best place to start. I like to say that the way I encountered the movement was a bit unexpected, but there had been something started in me before I met the movement. So like I was at the time working at a community radio station at the university. So it's a local community station for the university, but it reaches out all across Ottawa. And because it's a nexus point of the university, there's always people coming through. It's a campus. And one day somebody had a bunch of newspapers in his hands and he was alone. And I just noticed newspaper. I see a bunch of newspapers in the radio station. So I'm just gonna grab, don't just give me one, give me 10, I'll lay them out in the radio station. And so that's what it was like. I didn't know anything about it. We never exchanged words. But later on, I had this at home and I kept looking at it and it was saying the webcast. So a
Mm-hmm.
webcast to me was interesting because at the time I was into music recording.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought, okay, if I want to make recordings, how do I put it on the net? It was still new at the time. And here was this webcast. I tuned in, I saw Lynn, and he mesmerized me because I had been on a journey to understand the banking. Like I was
Mm-hmm.
reading up on the Canadian bank at the time
Okay.
on my own.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, like not full time, but in the back burner thing.
Yeah.
And I had started in. asking myself questions about how the world is run. And then here was this guy who had all the answers, or seemed to know things on a level I had never encountered before. I used to think that I thought kind of most of the adults in my life had been kind of like I could criticize them pretty easily on how they were thinking,
Hmm.
but here was this guy who was challenging me, and that's how it started.
Okay. Do you remember what year that was?
2005,
Okay. Yeah.
about springtime.
They were heavy into the webcasts for sure during those years. I mean, Lynn started doing them like every few months, like I want to say every like 3 to 6 months. I don't remember. It was like a little bit hazy, but that was definitely a big focus. We wanted people to tune in for sure because we were like into the live numbers and stuff. We also wanted them to watch it later. And then for years, a lot of our printed materials, the pamphlets we would take out in the field were just the transcripts of those webcasts, for a long, long time. And it was a lot for people. I mean, anyone now, I'm not going to put a link in the description here, but anyone could look them up. You can watch them if you're curious to see. And this is for my audience that doesn't really know Mr. LaRouche as well, but they're very dense. Often he would talk at length, geopolitics, but of course philosophy and culture and sort of everything that he had at his disposal intellectually. And there was always it's usually a Q&A session as well for those webcasts, either live or sent in whatever via the web. And he would respond with in unexpected ways and deeply intellectual and sort of unorthodox or fascinating ways, right? I think that drew people in. I know that was something for me to like, oh, this guy's talking about stuff. Like I get several of his references, but there's like maybe 100 references in here that I don't get. So let me look those up and kind of like challenge. It's like more challenging for people, right? Okay, so you said 2005. Okay. Um, and then did you ever end up, was the person who brought in the newspapers, was that one of our organizers or just a random person?
Well, I eventually met that person. I think that
Uh,
was like I correlated the
sure.
person,
Yeah, yeah,
but it was not precise. It must have been this guy.
sure,
I'm not going to say his name, but
sure.
he probably knows who he is because I mentioned to him. He, like he eventually left the organization, but
Hmm.
I yeah, this was amazing. And because I had watched this documentary or this webcast,
Hmm.
uh, I started obsessing over it in a sense like, okay, I'm at the radio station and I have shows to fill.
Sure.
So why don't I just play it?
Gotcha.
And I started playing whole webcasts at the radio station, but then somebody told me, like a colleague at the radio station said, you probably uh can't do that.
Yeah,
So, and partly it was you have to have permission, but it's also like this is a political message and it may not be everybody who wants to hear this message. Like I
yeah,
started being confronted with the the opposition you might find in the culture.
sure. Yeah, yeah, the resistance. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's funny. So we did a lot of stuff like in the early days where we would our organizers or supporters that wanted to do stuff for us to help us out, get the message out. They would do things like send information to radio stations. I know there was a team for a while, like all they did was send VHS tapes to local public access stations around the US, just so that it was like broadcasting as much as possible, and it would be like those longer speeches. And I know some of our, well, one in particular, I won't name drop him, but one of our more famous supporters who worked with our youth movement originally came across us because he saw one of these public access broadcasts. It was about the Bush years and the future, that kind of thing. So it's funny, how that works. You never know who you're gonna affect or get that message across to. Okay,
Yeah.
so you're stewing on the idea for a bit. You're reading it and you're reading into it, and it's already sort of intersected some of the ideas you were looking into anyway. And this, early 2000s, and I think we're similar in age, so our generations get a little bit
Are we?
more. I don't know. I'm 41. I'm 41.
Well, I'm 48, so
Okay. Okay. Well,
yeah,
close enough. Well, you look
yeah,
young. You
yeah.
got the Canadian genes. But
It's the cold. It's the cold.
yeah, it keeps the skin tight.
Mm.
Nice. Nice. Well, close enough anyway. But maybe you were, yeah, but similar enough that we're starting to get more mindful about how the world's working and such. And then, okay, then what happened? What happened next?
Well, I mean, in between, I went to a trip in Belgium, and
Okay.
I started. It was with other young people from other community new like radio stations from Montreal and other places. And
Hmm.
I started like I was listening it to it on the plane, the CDs. I had made CDs,
Oh,
and
nice.
I wanted to show everyone like, hey, this is the best thing, you know?
Yeah,
And
yeah,
then they were like, what? What are
yeah.
you doing?
Mm.
Yeah. So, and eventually I quit the job I was working at and I went to move in Montreal. And while I was in Montreal, I had left a message to one of the publications. I had called the number for Montreal, and somebody called me back while like 2, 3 months later, I was in Montreal. I get this phone call on the voicemail. Oh, we're doing a webcast. You can come into the office, and the youth won't be there because they're out deployed in Washington. And but you can come to the around the office. And I thought, wow, that's what? How come the people are in Washington? You know,
Yeah,
like
yeah,
that's impressive to me. And I showed up at this office, and it was a bunch of uh, boomers or
sure.
other older adults,
Yeah, yeah.
mostly maybe one or two younger people. But immediately somebody gave me a magazine about nuclear energy.
Hmm.
And I had never been presented with anything related to nuclear energy before, but
Yeah.
I thought it was fascinating.
Hmm. Okay. That's funny.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was for me, one of the early things that made me realize that they were an intelligent group because my grandfather worked in nuclear energy and he was always sort of preaching it to us like why it's so safe and why it's so good. Um, so I was like, oh, they're and like growing up in the Northwest, a lot of it's like Democratic Party dominated, and there's a lot of green stuff, a lot of anti-nuclear. So like, all right, well, these guys seem like they're Democrats because they're opposing the war, but they're also pro-nuclear, so that's cool. Like that's two wins right there. Kind of funny side note. My grandpa worked so after World War II, well, he worked on the Manhattan Project, helping to build H bombs, which is kind of crazy. Um, and then he became a nuclear engineer, helping to develop nuclear reactors, including some like hybrids and just different kind of like experimental stuff. And then that's how that part of my family moved up to Washington State to work on in Tri-Cities, the Hanford plant, which is what they developed plutonium for the second bomb used in World War II. And they talk about it in that Oppenheimer movie. If you've seen that one, it's a really good movie.
Yep.
Um, 2004, I think, me and a couple friends go on a trip uh, in the movement, go on a trip out to Tri-Cities to try and they were shutting down this nuclear reactor, and it was during uh, Bush Jr.'s first term, and it was 2003, 2004, and it was called the Fast Flux Test Facility, and it was experimental, but it was the main source of nuclear radioisotopes in the United States.
The medical
Um,
isotopes.
Medical isotopes, yep, which is like the better way to cure cancer than chemotherapy because you can smart target the cancer cells. It costs more to shut it down than it would have cost to run it for its entire life cycle, right? So we're like, this is crazy. We joked about going out to the nuclear reactor and chaining ourselves, kind of like as chaining ourselves to it. It's like you can't shut this down.
Greenpeace
I
style.
know. Yeah, just as like a joke. And I was really lobbying for it, but the boss was like, Sven, you can't do that. That's you're gonna go to jail. I'm like, well, let's do it.
Who was the
Um,
boss?
I mean, the whatever, the local,
Someone.
yeah, I don't want to dime people out.
Yeah,
Because
yeah.
in retrospect, they were correct. You know, that would have been a bad
Yeah.
idea, right?
Yeah.
But still funny. Um, and we ended up meeting with the dude who was like the project lead because we had all kinds of contacts, you know. all the nuclear community was like backing us up. We're having rallies out there, and it's like very conservative district, but they still were like, yeah, this is crazy because this is, our livelihood. And part of it was the green influence. This group called Heart of America, which like they just use all kinds of misinformation to scare people about it. Because Hanford did have some problems with cleanup and such. Anyway, we met with the dude and we're like trying to convince him like just don't do this. Like just quit. Just don't do it. But turns out kind of funny. I didn't realize at the time. I realized much later that my grandpa had helped design the reactor we were trying to save. So
Wow.
kind of a cool little story. And he told me about
That's amazing.
how
Yeah.
it was built. Yeah. But anyway, that's a little bit of a tangent, but kind of fun just because it's a fun story. We did, and they did shut it down, unfortunately. And so then the bulk of the radioisotopes we have to get for the cancer treatment, we have to import from overseas, which is crazy because the time limits
From
are like,
overseas
yeah,
or from
from
Canada?
maybe from Canada. Yeah.
Because we have a Chalk River, I think, or we have some production of medical isotopes in Canada
Okay.
still.
Okay. Yeah, we probably do. We probably do. Yeah. So that's good.
Yeah.
Okay. So you come to the office. You meet the boomers and the older people. I think I was actually in DC at that time in '05 like it was a big rally or whatever. Um, so I think that's when I first met the Canadians. Um, I'm pretty sure. Yeah, that's funny. Small world. We're on two sides of that equation. Okay, so you go to see the webcast in person. Is that what it was?
Yeah, at the
Okay.
office,
Yeah, and you got to meet them.
I got to meet them, but then they said, if you're interested, you can come with us for the next webcast when we go to Washington. And I was like, for sure, I want to meet Lynn. I saw this guy, I want to meet him, I want to see him in
Yeah,
person.
sure.
And the thing is, I also, in the meantime, I met all the young people who had come back uh, from Washington. They were all excited, jubilant about everything they had done there, the people they had met,
Yeah,
and we started organizing. Like I started organizing with them on the streets. We would read every day, like some Alexander Hamilton or something like that,
sure.
and started being introduced to Plato
Hmm.
and the Crito
Yeah, the Credo
dialogue.
dialogue. Sure.
Yeah.
Hmm.
And for me, this was like all my life I had been very looking for intellectual discussions whenever I could have them,
Hmm.
and they were not happening as much as I would like to. And
Sure.
my mom had even said that you probably need to meet other people who are like you.
Yeah. Yeah.
She probably ended up regretting that
Yeah.
suggestion, but yeah, I recognized that this is what I needed. I needed to be around other people who were curious or were valuing these ideas and wanted to go deeper into them. So that's what
Yeah.
we did.
I think it was a big draw for a lot of people, really, because I mean, I think, I mean, my image of like what university was going to be, and not like when I first went into college, it was just a community college and nothing that fantastic. But it was like I was looking for something more intellectual and more challenging, and like looking to be around young people, discussing those things. Like that's always like that was the image I had, and then going there, you're like, all right, this isn't this isn't it. And it's like, oh, maybe just my school. But then as a part of working with the organization for as long as I did, I mean, I've been to just about every major university you can think of, especially on the coasts, right? West Coast, East Coast. I've been to most of the Ivy League. I've been, and I've been to a lot of other universities beyond that. And I talked to a ton of university students, all levels, and professors, and realized it's not the fault wasn't with the size of my school. The fault
Yeah.
was with the university system, had just very low standards, and young people that they're not really there for an education. Some of them are for sure, but it's maybe more niche. But there wasn't that level of discussion, and we were there like being the discussion. Like we were the people, like, whatever. You talk to some econ student, they haven't read Hamilton, so they don't really know. They just read Adam Smith, or even they read like a textbook description of what Adam Smith was. So they haven't like read the text, so like we're challenging them that. philosophy students that haven't really wrestled with Plato. People hadn't really studied the Western canon of literature, right? I went back to school to study that as well and realized even going back to it, even like in a master's program, you're not getting the depth of discussion that we would have, right? So it became like for a lot of people at the time, our organization was like, this is what you were looking for, in a lot of ways. Like this is the group of intellectuals that you thought you were gonna be going to college, but they weren't there. They're just
Right.
and I I partied in school and stuff too, so I'm not like I'm some saint or something, but like that I was not that I'm saying like oh that's the only pe reason people go. That's part of why people go. Sure, you're free from your parents for the first time. You're sort of half out in the world, right? Living by yourself. But yeah. So anyway, just to kind of foot stomp that concept that we were in many ways to many people we were the things that they were looking for in college.
I remember going to Boston. We would go to Boston a lot
Yeah.
once like I was in the movement. And you get to think about what you're doing. You're actually at Harvard on the
Yeah.
campus, and you're meeting the students, and you're like what you're saying, like they're not any better because they're at Harvard.
Sure.
They don't know everything, and they probably don't care about a lot of things because they're just hyper focused on success for their own personal career in many
Hmm.
cases. Um,
Sure.
but yeah, I just thought it was funny. You could tell your friends, I went to Harvard
Sure.
too, but
Yeah.
it's a joke, right?
And their education was no more better than, some state school, wherever, any state school. It's the same. Like you're paying for the name. It's hard to get in. You need the pedigree and everything, and you need whatever to be well-rounded. But at the end of the day, they're no smarter than anybody. It's just, yeah, the quality's so low. But okay, so you get involved. This is when you're getting involved. And you do end up going to DC the next time. Is that right?
Yeah,
Okay.
yes, yeah, for sure. And we're holding the banners.
Sure.
And I remember because there's a picture they used. I was in that picture, and they kept using it for the EIRs.
Okay.
And I was like, hey, or maybe they used it once and I saw myself, and I was like, oh, that's awesome. I was
Yeah.
there, I'm
Yeah,
part of
yeah.
history.
Hmm.
Yeah. And
Yeah,
I know these people, this guy, this guy, this guy. I talked with these people.
sure.
And
So you went down to the second time. Yeah.
yeah. And like it was pretty rough. I mean, it was not like you were staying in a luxury hotel, right? It was kind of like a lot of things were coming together at the last minute. Other people were coming in from all the other parts of the country.
Sure.
So this was exciting. You're meeting from people from other countries. They're all meeting in DC because this was a week of action.
Yep.
And not only are we going to be in DC, but we're going to go in Congress and in the halls of Congress or the Senate or whatever, we're going to meet actual like politicians, their staffers,
Hmm.
and this was the real deal. I thought this is it. This is the movement.
Yeah. No, it had a really beautiful, exciting quality to it. Those kinds of things we would do. Yeah, because we take people, usually like representatives from all of our field offices around the country, and they all converge into DC for that week. And so you have, excited young people that are intellectual, they're trying to get something accomplished. And then we're running up against these people in, so-called leadership positions in whatever the House or the Senate or whatever, think tankers, et cetera, say ambassadors. You run into all kind of military personnel and you realize that they just do not know what they're doing. They don't really have a clue. They're just trying to get along, and they might not have that much of a scope because maybe they just never heard about the ideas we're talking about. That was part of it too, right? Like one example, the North American Water and Power Alliance was this plan we had to, partially dam these three rivers up in Alaska and the Yukon Territory and funnel water through this massive natural system of canals, the Rocky Mountain Trench. So like the space between the mountain ranges would be like a huge natural canal. We just have to dam a couple sides of it and then bring it down for water into the Southwest. So this is an idea in the 50s and 60s, and it got some popularity in the 60s and then kind of died off. So we were like reviving it, and it was cool because it was bipartisan. It's not really Democrat Republican thing. You're like, no, this would be, millions of jobs. We revitalize concrete, electrical, dam building, nuclear power is going to be part of it, et cetera, et cetera. Like all these, and you're going to double the amount of arable land in the Southwest because you're just bringing in so much fresh water. So all these positives, but it's not a left or right thing. It's just this cool idea. And so part of it, not to just be too cynical and say like, oh, these people didn't know what they were doing, which is true, but they also like it was our job to like sort of supply these ideas that could change the country. This would be great for Canada and the US would be dope because it's, you're going to help industrialize British Columbia and some of the Yukon and like there's to this day not many people up there, right? It's just this vast wilderness, which is great. It's beautiful, but also like why not help people raise their living standard, their standard of living? So anyway, so yeah, so there's an excitement. Yeah, but we're also like sleeping on couches and floors, and some people like sleeping in the office, and we're all crammed together, and it's hectic, but there's this sort of beautiful hectic quality to it, all this energy.
But let me just pause here because
Yeah.
you talked about the NOAPA, uh, what it represents, and it's neither left nor right. But this is what I think I learned from LaRouche, and I try to synthesize the lessons.
Sure.
Uh, and the most important lesson was that an economy, yeah, you can talk about the physical economy, and that's what I would repeat the words often enough to people. It's about physical economy,
Hmm.
and people like as if people were supposed to recognize, oh yeah, physical economy, I know what that is,
Sure. No one knew. Yeah. Yeah.
but they don't. And the organizer, me, if I'm the organizer example here, wouldn't know that where the population is at. Like they wouldn't realize that this is unique in the sense that you've been exposed to a concept which most people have never heard of,
Sure. Yeah.
because maybe a generation ago or two generations ago, but they might have called it something else before.
Yeah.
But now you have this guy LaRouche who's saying, well, let's call it physical economics. We're
Hmm.
going to tie it down to the history precedents of Leibniz and all that. But
Yeah.
the point is, you're when you build the a big project, you have a platform of economics, but you're upgrading all the people in your culture who have to build it.
Yeah.
If you're not giving them an opportunity, they're going to waste these people.
Sure.
So yeah, I just wanted to throw that in now, just before,
Yeah.
um,
Well, yeah. Well, part of it
in
too.
case we don't get the chance again.
Sure, yeah. No, part of it on that too, right? Like, and I mean, I still think NOAP is a good idea. I still think we should even, and I brought it up in my episode with Joanne, but uh, Trump of all people
Yeah,
was
on
talking
Joe
about
Rogan. Yeah, I saw it.
he was talking about NOAPA, not by name, but like it's really interesting. I never would have thought he would be the person to bring it, but it's just a good idea. It's just a good
Yeah,
idea. And the other thing we brought up in that context too is like imagine the mindset change, because there's a lot of despair in the West right now. Economy, inability to buy a house, inflation versus living standard and living wages, et cetera. So there's a lot of, legitimate cause for despair or for people to be cynical and have a pessimistic outlook towards their future. But imagine a young person, let's say they're, like a senior in high school right now, and they see that our country is building this 10-year project that's massive. It's going to dwarf the seven wonders of the world, and that it's going to take 10 years to build. But like maybe they could be a part of it. Like we talked about, the Civilian Conservation Corps was this great program in the 1930s, part of Franklin Roosevelt's Four Corners projects to sort of revitalize the economy. Right, but you have young people going out and building projects. But a lot of it is like reforestation, or they're doing contour farming, or some of like the stuff with like rural electrification. All these, point being, like you're bringing young people into this project, which is helping them improve our country. They get some skills out of it, right? So I could see scenarios where it would be part of, and I sort of advocated this for a little bit, but you really could have it be part of the military, right? Like Army Corps of Engineers, like Navy Seabees could do it. It could be like a subset of like, it could be like a quasi-military branch kind of thing, just for like temporary purposes. Say we're going to build this thing, and you get paid, and not going to be paid a ton, but you're going to get probably like a GI Bill for your schooling, and you get the skills, and you get to just help build the country up. And just imagine the difference in mindset. A young person like, hey, we're like I helped build this thing, and it was gigantic, and I was one part of whatever 5 million people working on it, but I helped build it. And then now we don't have droughts in California, and now we have better farmland in Arizona and New Mexico. So like that was like to me a good example of like the nonpartisan ideas that just made sense. And and these people in Congress never heard of it, and people on campuses never heard of it. So later on, we developed. I wasn't a huge part of it. I did some of the films on it. I made some of the multimedia um, aspects, tools that we built. But we had people, my friends, that all like they organized all these people around the country that were just, experts in water and rail and dam building and nuclear to get them together and like, okay, let's flesh out this program more specifically. Let's do the legwork before the funding study, right? Because you want to like fund it before you can see is this feasible. And we had it like it was ready to go. It was ready to go. And we were getting people signed on, and this was a certain complaint from different people I've talked to, different organizers I've talked to that right we're getting this like sort of critical mass on it, then we shifted our policies and we shifted the focus away from it. And I forget what we shifted it to. Maybe it was like Glass-Steagall or something, but like we moved off it right when we were about to get some like we had senators say that like they would sign on to the bill, you know? Yeah, and it was like it was building for sure, and then like no, we're changing, and that was a critique. So anyway,
Yeah, well, there's a lot of things going on, and there's also all kinds of crises, where
sure, yeah,
and,
yeah,
and bad leadership. There's been a lot of things going on at the whole time.
sure,
Um, yeah, I don't remember everything that happened,
yeah, a lot of moving
but
parts. Yeah, my main memory is that because I was right next to all the people that were because I was helping to set up the conferences for these people to come in. They're coming into our national youth headquarters, Purcellville, Virginia at the time, to have these like week-long planning sessions where they're going through, okay, where's this route going to go? How are we going to build this? Let's look at that mountain range, and we made a lot of products on that. Like, here's how it's going to look. So yeah, but the takeaway being like they moved off it, and it was I think in retrospect a mistake. I know there's like a lot of factors for why I forget what it was, what they switched it to, but yeah. Anyway,
but now Trump is talking about bringing it back. Which
he
what do you
is.
think? Do you think that's he's serious about that?
I don't know. I'm not sure. Um I can say it now before he takes office because he will be my commander in chief, and I can't comment on it. But it's in terms of a policy, like we already just been talking about in this section here, like I support NOAPA. I still think it's a good idea. I think it would change the way people view our country. It would definitely help young people see that there's a plan, a long-term plan. It probably will take, like maybe 10 to 15 years just because there's a lot of government oversight, right or wrong. Um, but no, like I don't care who the party is that does it. I think it should happen, you know?
Right.
So I'm happy. I'm happy if it happens. I think people should know about it, and it would be amazing. It still would be amazing.
Have you heard of the talk of I don't know how serious it is, but incorporating Canada into the United States?
I heard some discussion about it. I don't know how serious it is. It seemed more like a joke
But
kind of thing. Yeah.
yeah,
I don't know
but
if
I mean,
it's even a good
if
idea, but
yeah, but I think in a way it is a good idea because NAAPA makes it easier to build if you're part of the same country.
sure.
And that's why I bring it in
Yeah.
because of the NAAPA question. But also I'm reminded when I first because I was recruited out of Montreal, we people would like emphasize, Benjamin Franklin wrote a letter to the Quebecois, and
Yeah, yeah.
he was inviting you to join the United States back then. And obviously we missed that boat, but
Yeah.
there's something fascinating about completing something that was started a long time ago to me.
Sure. No, that's pretty cool. Funny side on my other grandparents' side. This is just a fun story, not super relevant, but I think you'll appreciate it, being Canadian. Uh, and this is on my mom's dad's side. So they were Scottish, leaving to try to come to the United States during the Revolutionary War. Their ship got captured, and my ancestor was impressed to fight in the British Navy to fight against the Americans, right?
Wow.
And it was called impressment. It was a big deal. The Navy still talks about it. Um, so they fought honorably, and their retirement was land in Nova Scotia. So New Scotland, right? Nova Scotia. So they lived there until my great grandpa moved to the Yukon Territory for like the gold rush.
Wow.
And my grandpa, well, I don't know, he was a lawyer, but he wasn't there for the gold rush to be a prospector, but just for the new opportunity. So on one day, my great grandpa passes the bar to become a lawyer. The next day, my grandpa's born, and the day after that, my great grandpa dies of Spanish flu.
Whoa.
So he was born in Yukon and then came down. Then his mom took him down to Washington State, which is how that family came over. So I have Canadian roots as well. Just
Oh,
funny story. Yeah, funny branch. But
but it ties into LaRouche too, because um, he's got a side of the
sure,
family from Quebec.
sure. Yeah, he
And
talked about it a
and
lot.
actually it ties into me, I think. Like I wish it's true. I'm not sure. I haven't verified it. But my dad once told me, there's a LaRouche in the one of the old grandmas,
Oh, that's
Uh,
funny. That's funny.
but I just see like Lynn, uh, the LaRouche factor is also, I think, maybe intertwined with some Native American Indians
Okay,
because that Quebecois, there's a lot of mix
sure.
with the natives over there.
Yeah.
And I, s- okay, this is where when I first went to Washington, I wanted to say this story because when I went into the room, I felt like the presence of Lynn from the moment I walked in the room.
Mm.
So like I felt this guy had an aura, like
Mm-hmm.
huge, huge aura.
Sure.
And I could feel it. Like I when I looked at the stage, I didn't just see like a guy over there. I That guy was coming all the way to the to me as I was walking into the room. And I feel that's a presence thing, but I also think it ties into the Native American Indian spirit uh,
Sure.
tradition. There's
Okay.
something that has been transmitted, I think, I could be
Yeah.
wrong, to Lynn um through this means. And anyways, it impressed me. It
Uh-huh.
it it was part of how I started to see Lynn as some kind of very special figure. That's not just like you can't just say like, oh yeah, he's a political figure. He's a political figure. They're all the same.
Sure.
This was like, no, 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 no. This is totally different.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I can
So
see that. Yeah. Yeah. I can see. Yeah, for sure. I first met him after he came down to Portland to do some meetings, and so our Seattle office went down to meet him, and it was after the Madrid bombing in 2004. It was like the next day. So he like had that on his mind, but it was in a small room of this hotel, a little like conference room, just like an office room sort of thing. And we're all like packed in there, but it was very interesting. I could definitely see that aura kind of quality. I mean, he's had a larger than life, and certainly the whole organization revered him, right? So that I think that played into it too, because you're just hanging on his every word. You want to know what he has to say, and like that it's so out of a lot of what our young people had experienced in life at the time. As mentioned before, like here you have young people that are excited about ideas and they're trying to change the world, right or wrong. And then they're they're inspired by this dude who at the time was in his 80s, and the people on the outside are like, what? You're following some 80-year-old dude. Like, yeah, he's the smartest one. So he's the one trying to accomplish these things.
He
So
was the first one on the socials, so
yeah, yeah. I think they were ahead of the game with the webcast stuff in a way. I think we missed the boat on the social media, um, and I think we missed the boat on the podcasts. That would have been his natural domain, and even just like our members going on the sort of early podcast circuit would have been more useful. But too late now. But interesting.
Whoa, why is it too late now? Maybe it's just the time now to do it.
I mean, they sh if they wanted to, yeah, they should. I think they should, and I think maybe to some degree they have.
Well, you're
But
doing it.
I'm doing, yeah. I mean, I'm not part of the organization. I'm doing it to chronicle, you know.
Okay, well let's talk about that for a second,
Sure,
if you don't mind.
sure.
The organization.
Hmm.
So when I was reading the pamphlet at the back, it was saying a university on wheels or a movement,
Hmm.
And Lynn would talk about something like it's not hierarchical. It's not like you have like this set fixed leadership.
Hmm.
And in that sense, um, there's a lot of ways that I think somebody can be part of the movement.
Sure.
And the whole organization, if you take it philosophically, is the organization of the whole universe.
Okay.
So I don't think you should self uh
Self-exclude.
self exclude.
Okay.
Um,
Fair enough. I mean, I see where you're going with that. I forgot about the University on Wheels. That was a tagline forever on the back of every pamphlet. Yeah. And I think we did that. I mean, we were just, we're setting up Madra brigades, whatever, wherever. Cadre schools, we haven't talked about those. Yeah, that's a
oh,
big
those
thing
were
too.
amazing.
Those were amazing. Well, tell our audience about what Cadre schools were.
Cadre schools were the place where you were at a party without alcohol
Hmm.
with the smartest people in the world you've ever seen.
Yeah,
But the headspace was like you were transposed into Greece or like the Academy of Athens, or
sure.
you were you were um, you were realizing that the conversation you were having was the most creative discussion or the most creative party going on at the time. And it's you could take that experience and you could keep it in your mind and be a changed person forever because you realize what it meant to be a human being, not only like being creative on your own in your own little basement doing your own thing, but socially.
Hmm.
And the impressive thing was you were given challenges that were really challenging in the sense that you thought you knew, oh yeah, you can double the square. You would say, okay, can you double the square? Can you double the cube? Can you double the volume of a cone? And you would think at first you would say to yourself, well, I know math, so I'm probably going to do this like easy.
Sure.
But then you had somebody else next to you challenging you who maybe have had done it before you or had been challenged before and they realized you needed to be challenged in a certain way, in a nice way,
Yeah.
but you have to realize you don't really know what you're talking about.
Hmm.
You think you do, but we're gonna see if what comes out of your mouth indicates that you really know what's going on or not.
Sure. Hmm.
And that
Yeah.
was like humbling. That was humbling to realize, okay, this is um we're not going to assume we know everything
Yeah.
because we know we have people around us who are challenging us to explain just how well we know it, and maybe we don't know it
Yeah.
so well.
Yeah. And for our audience too, part of it was inspired by this famous dialogue from Plato called the Meno, Meno dialogue. And you can read it for yourself if you're curious. But Socrates takes this slave boy through the what's called the doubling of the square, the geometric doubling of the square. And we would recreate that. We've recreated that thousands of times with people on street corners and at cadre schools. Just to put a little bit of detail on it, we would like rent these cabins, out kind of in nature, and we'd spend a weekend where we'd invite contacts to come out to just do this deeply intellectual weekend. We'd have political discussions. There'd be a lot of briefings in classes, but then a lot of it was like hands-on science, including things like doubling the square or something called doubling the cube, which comes from another Plato dialogue. I think it's from the Timaeus. I can't remember. Someone can comment what it is. But that one's even crazier and very difficult. But like when you take someone through the geometric doubling of the square, you can't do it using what most people knew from like, algebra. You can't do it algebraically because that's not doing anything. You have to like draw a square and then find like how to make a square exactly double that size and using just geometry to do it. And the very fun experience for like an organizer is you see that like creative spark of someone when because there's a bunch of ways to solve it, but most people solve it kind of one of two or three ways. But you see that spark where like they actually discover how it's done, and they didn't do it from memorizing something that's like which is a lot of what you got in schools. And then especially doubling the cube is even crazier. But and so we would give people that experience. Like this is what it means to discover something, right? Like you're not the first to discover it, but you genuinely discovered it. I didn't tell you what it was. You
Well,
figured it
if
out.
the good organizers would not tell, but
Sure,
that was a challenge at first because you want. I mean, I know I wanted to give the answer sometimes,
sure,
and you're like struggling, like why am I not doing it as well as the other guy who like.
sure, sure. And then we would do that. I mean, I remember one I was at in Boston. I can't remember if you were there. Some of the Canadians came down where we went through is when we were doing a lot of the work on Kepler. So Johannes Kepler, he discovered the laws of gravitation. And we were doing it was the new astronomy. We were doing books 3 and 4, and it was like maybe 10 hours on books 3 and 4, and like it was just everyone was just super focused, and it was like myself and a couple others leading the courses on it. Um, but it's you give people that experience. You take them outside, sort of almost like a different universe because you're out in nature, but then like as you use the word headspace of just the academy, the Solon's Academy or the Academy of Athens, right? Plato's Academy, and you just get people in that realm where they're like they can, for the first time, for many people, can understand the power of their mind, and it's intoxicating.
Yeah, because it's your
hmm
nature,
hmm
not just you, but humans, everyone.
hmm Yeah, I think
And
so.
so we're denying the people that are not doing that part of their job,
hmm
they're denied their humanity.
Yeah, that's usually like the natural people realize that, right? Like people feel there's a lot of experience with contacts. They feel robbed. Like I just spent whatever $50,000 in this university education, and I didn't learn anything. Like I learned things, but like I just learned to memorize things or like learn to compare and contrast, but I didn't necessarily discover anything, you know? Or like why, very, very common comment, like why are they not teaching this in schools? Why am I hearing about it from you young people, in raggedy pants who follow some 87-year-old dude, with like rant with like wild literature, and why is this not the mainstream?
Yeah.
So that was a common comment for sure.
Yeah,
Okay.
why?
Yeah,
And the thing is, if we realize that, how come it's not so easy to change the educational system right now? Even though, like, is it because they never thought about it?
sure. Yeah. Is it as simple as writing a piece of legislation, right? Because it's a lot of those issues are more on the culture. Like how do you change the culture around something? And that's a harder piece of the puzzle for sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
So so you start organizing, you become more like a full-time member around like '05, '06-ish.
0506. Yeah, I mean,
Yeah,
pretty much a month after I met them, I'm moving into a house where they live,
sure.
and we go every day. We have like at least 6 days out of the week that we're doing organizing stuff,
hmm
something or
Yeah.
reading.
hmm
and maybe you get a day to do your own reading on your own
Sure.
in that week and to buy groceries,
Sure.
things like that.
Yeah.
Wash a bit of clothes, but that's it. Like you're mostly in a social environment or in a discussion. Okay, well, who's cooking dinner like who's
Sure.
leading the chorus work? Who's doing the class next week or this week or tonight?
Sure. Yeah, yeah. 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 Each local, it tended to be like twice a week. You'd have a class. So you'd invite contacts in. Like, oh, come for first part's going to be a political briefing, and then it's going to be a class. And sometimes they were combined. Usually they weren't. Usually it's two different people doing parts of it. Um, yeah, and then we had most locals, most days would be out, in the field organizing to meet new people. And the evenings would be either like meeting with contacts or doing phone calls to try and reach people, fundraise, but also meet and recruit young people. And then most locals had something called a reading day, which was like a day for self-development. You could pursue your own intellectual pursuits, and then also like, yeah, take care of laundry or whatever. And then we had different kinds of rotations for like, oh, who's going to cook dinner. Some locals did it like as a like, okay, today, okay, on Tuesday, Luke, you're going to make dinner for everybody, and Wednesday I will, whatever. Some like logistical schedules like that too. So there's a certain ebb and flow of those weekly schedules. And then we'd have cadre schools once every like 6 months or something. Locals do it maybe twice a year. Sometimes we'd have bigger ones. And then we had the webcast, as mentioned, or events like that, or weeks of action, like, oh, hey, Congress is going to be in during this week, so we're going to send reps here. Or we had like, I think Joanne talked about in episode 2, like the Democratic Party convention 2004. It's like that's a big one, like we're going to send a lot of youth out there for that. So things like that.
Yeah.
Okay, so you're there in '05, and yeah, what was it like for I never got, as I mentioned before we started recording, I never made it up to Montreal. But what was it like? I mean, it's going to be different, right? Because you guys are organizing from the Canadian perspective, so it's a little bit different than maybe our American offices would experience, right? Would you say?
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. It's always been a struggle to like situate, okay, like you're hearing, like we would get on a morning call or an evening call with Lynn uh, on a fairly regular basis. And then
Hmm.
he would say, this is what we're doing. And it's all United States centric.
Sure.
And you're hearing that, and your mind has to say, okay, well, what's the translation? Is there a translation to be made? Like you're asking yourself, is it the same thing or is it not the same thing?
Sure.
Um, and are we organizing in a sense that this is what United States needs to do so that Canada can be in a better posture?
Hmm.
Or is that something that we need Canadian politicians to do? Mostly, I would say it was the former. Like we would say, okay, well, United States need to pass Glass-Steagall, for example, because if they do that, then we deal with the whole big economy,
Sure.
Wall Street, and then
Hmm.
we don't have the money pressure on our politicians, for example.
Sure.
Uh, you yeah, so it was always and we would have a lot of discussions
Hmm.
amongst the organizers in Canada, and whenever we would have like somebody like an older member from the States come and give a presentation, spend a week with us,
Sure.
or we would have people like Matt Ogden or some of the uh, uh, pretty leadership. We refer to them as like leadership people,
Sure.
cadre of the youth movement,
Hmm.
and they would come up. They would give a briefing, and we would ask them the questions like, "What does it mean for Canada?" Or asking Bruce or whatever, "What does it mean for Canada?"
Yeah.
And we would write our questions to Lynn, like, "What should we do in Canada?"
Right.
And Lynn would say, "Well, focus on the science."
Sure.
A lot of the time he would focus us on the science.
Hmm.
If we're not necessarily in the same intensity of the day-to-day changing legislations, organizing for votes or mobilizations for a particular law, then
Sure.
yeah. But we would still talk about everything like this. We would brief the Canadians on Sainte Catherine Street, which is one of the busiest street in Montreal.
Okay.
Most where the Americans go, if they're going to Montreal, they'll probably know of Sainte Catherine.
Sure.
And we just brief anyone, and they're people because Canada is such a uh, what's the word I'm looking for? Like a crossroad uh, location. There's
Sure.
people, a lot of tourists, a lot of people from all over the world are going through this city. And
Hmm.
so we're intersecting people not only from Montreal, especially most of the people that would talk to us would be the people traveling, the people working here on the business trip, the people, yeah, you meet everyone basically.
Yeah.
Which is another thing which is fascinating. If you're out there going to work every day, kind of like I am doing right now, you don't get exposed to many different walks of life.
Sure.
But that's yeah, I'm taking this on a tangent, but we started with how we started this Canada centric, which
Sure.
is
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And I was just thinking about, okay, you're in the office now and like working full time, like with the movement. Okay. And then how long did you work with the movement?
Well, I probably stayed till 2008. I did a few phases,
Hmm.
and sometimes I would like go back to Ottawa, uh, took like a break or two, like a month, and then I would be back. Or one time, like I took a longer break.
Sure.
Um, yeah, that was a bit. It was hard sometimes,
Hmm.
and you. You're living with other people. It's there's a lot of pressure to read a lot,
Sure.
even when you don't care or you don't feel like it,
Sure.
uh, and organize when you don't feel like it.
Sure.
And
Yeah.
so that that that's something that I had to deal with. And sometimes I just went took a break.
Sure. Yeah. I think there was a lot of talking with, like I've said before, but like, starting the show has, catalyzed a lot of activity, a lot of people reaching out, saying like, oh, glad you're doing this, whatever, or just sharing their experiences, but like they don't want to ever come on, or they don't want to, they want to stay anonymous. I've talked about there's fear of people wanting to speak, of course, um, but a lot of the common threads are there was a feeling of like pressure, overt and covert for, people like, hey, like you should be doing this right now. Like, hey, why aren't you reading, or why aren't you want to come organize, or just like it always had the tinge of like, well, this is the most important thing you could be doing for mankind, right? So like, don't you want to do that? And like it's hard for him, like to say, no, I don't want to do that. Like, oh, I just want to be is either that, or if you're not doing that, then you're being selfish, you're being, childish, you're doing something other than the greatest possible good. So there has that pressure that would, in certain ways, help people develop in a way because they would like read more stuff and they'd organize stuff. But like it also is very, very difficult because there's that fear of departure, and there's that moral guilt associated with it as well. So yeah, people would take breaks and then but they would be criticized for taking breaks. Like, oh, this person's blocked. This person, they're in fantasy land was a common one. Right? They're in fantasy land. They're in their mother's womb. They just want to go back to the warm, cozy womb. Like I heard those descriptions countless, countless times. Um, just criticizing anyone who would do that kind of thing. And I get it, having been in the organization for so long. Like I would get it, and I would guilt people too at different times, like that's the realm where like it's like a self-policing kind of thing, you know. So, and even I brought it up
With
on a
chance, no? No?
well, Chance brought it up, but in I got some written feedback which I read at the beginning of episode 5 with George, and they brought up like the self-policing. I think they brought it in relation to Michel Foucault, the miniature the micro policing that people would do as a
Oh
self
yeah.
Yeah. So, which I think is a good way to describe it. So, okay. So,
Yeah, but on that point, one thing I I wanted to do, I wanted to read to assimilate at the timing I needed, you know. I thought sometimes it was going too fast for me.
sure.
And I gotta say that when I started, a lot of the people would be recruited over a long period of time. You know, they would like come to the office for like 6 months and then they would join. I was like already organizing, distributing literature or whatever from the get-go. Uh, I went to the office as soon as I could. I kind of like tried to move in with them as soon as I could, but I never really got the process of like transformation to like I didn't really realize what it was I had joined
Sure.
and is on a deeper level.
Hmm.
And so and I was fascinated with the fact that okay, Schiller, here we have all these collected works of Schiller and we have all these old Fidelios, all this literature which is fascinating,
Hmm.
but you can't appreciate it if you're rushed to read it or if some like you're reading on somebody else's timeline.
Sure.
And eventually, I gave myself the time to read uh, the aesthetical letters
Hmm.
or the articles about the aesthetical letters. And when I discovered no man must.
Sure. Famous line from Friedrich Schiller.
But for me, I was like, listen, guys, I'm gonna remember that because don't force me.
Sure.
I had my argument in Schiller. You know, this was an authoritative source here, and I was anchoring myself to in the fact that um, to be good is not because you're moral because you are forced into being moral. It doesn't work that way.
Yeah. Yeah. No, for our lay audience, Friedrich Schiller, called The Poet of Freedom. He wrote the Ode to Joy, the poem. He wrote Wilhelm Tell, Maid of Orleans. Great thinker. Y'all should read him just because you should read him. He's a great thinker for sure. Part of our organization was the Schiller Institute. It still exists. It's more on like the cultural advocacy side of things. And then they had a magazine. I think it was quarterly. Um, it might have been monthly at one point, but maybe it was monthly, but then it became quarterly, I think. But it was called Fidelia Magazine, which Luke was just referencing, and that's from Beethoven's Soul opera, his only opera. Very good opera, which you all should watch that opera too. But yes, and what you were just saying sort of gets me back thinking to what you were saying before about like, what constitutes a member? Is it just like the full-time member? And I got a mailbag item. It was sort of a critique of one of our previous shows, and like, oh, this person maybe wasn't a full-time member or whatever. And it's like, well, I don't think anyone can say if this member thought they were a member, that's all I care about, right? Like, I know people that for whatever reason had circumstances where they couldn't be full-time, but maybe their heart was more full-time than people we had full-time. It worked both ways. So it's like I'm not here to judge that aspect of it. And I think you're raising the point of like, well, bringing people in a lot of cases we brought people in too quick. I'm not saying with you, but I'm saying like sometimes we did. We didn't have any kind of standardized policy for a long time of like, how do we bring people in? It's just like, we just want people, and a lot of times we cast a net that was like very, very wide. And you brought people in, you're like, this person, they just shouldn't be here. Like they're not cut out for it. Or they think it's something else. Or sometimes you have people that they just kind of need a bed for a month or two. They like, so they'll put on a show doing the organizing. And maybe they buy into some of it, whatever. At a certain point later, we did a thing where it'd be like a trial, like, okay, come in for a month and we'll both see where we're at. That was a little bit better, I think. 'Cause you're like, all right, this is not for everybody. It just
No,
wasn't. It just wasn't. You might have all kinds of reasons why it wouldn't work out. But then the policy was like, oh, well, oftentimes the policy was, oh, well, they're not good enough or they're not moral enough, and we put it on them when it really was like it's a two-way street, like there's all kinds of ways the organization wasn't good for people. It just wasn't a good match. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's not a good fit for some people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we frowned upon sort of the part-time organizer, because it was always like full-time or nothing was sort of the mindset. And we'd bring up like um the Revolutionary War thinker, I'm forgetting his name right now, but the summer soldier and the part-time
Yeah.
patriot, right?
Yeah.
Not Patrick Henry. He wrote The Crisis. Thomas Paine. Thomas Paine.
Yeah.
Excuse me. Thomas Paine. Um, I knew I'd get it. But it was funny too, because in later years, the finances of the organization took a nosedive. Um, and you had people that they had to start doing part-time jobs. Like I saw it in different locals. So it's funny that became like an economic necessity, and the people at that point weren't looked down upon because like well, you just have to survive, right? Like the organization can't pay your paycheck as well as it did, whatever. So it's just funny in that way. It was acceptable then because of the conditions required it, but it wasn't acceptable before. Kind of interesting.
Well, the
I don't,
whole organization has been a movement. It's never been the same thing every like from one day to the next. I think it's
yeah,
always been different.
sure,
A member in Montreal has a reality which is a bit different than somebody in LA
sure,
or Detroit.
sure,
Uh, that's part of what makes each one of us unique. We're in the same movement, but we're all getting our own brand or our own experience.
sure, yeah,
You have your experience. You met other organizers I never met.
sure, yeah, yeah, vice versa, right,
Yeah,
yeah. I think I did meet all the youth in Montreal, at least back when I was in one way or another. They're all great people. They're all cool. Um, okay, so I mean, so you still associate yourself with like the overall thrust of the organization in a way. Would you say that's fair?
for sure. For me,
Okay.
I never. I saw some members leave the organization
Hmm.
and like,
Sure.
um,
And
not
understandable too. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Uh,
But I mean, some were more acrimony than others, like
sure.
display more acrimony. But in for me, I really kept being briefed however I could in up to now.
Uh-huh.
I still watch Harley every day.
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay. Nice. Yeah. Again, like I'm not, gonna criticize that or anything because it's my focus, of course, is like just to chronicle the experiences, right? And yeah, a lot of people I talk to, they're still tuned in one way or the other, at least like following it, maybe not advocating for it. And I've discussed in previous episodes some of the issues I think at the feet of the organization where we built this big wall, say like, no, 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 stay in, stay in, stay in, stay in. And when people would jump over the wall and leave, uh, they'd be criticized like harshly. All any little transgression they had done, it all got brought out. It was like the reading of the receipts, right? It's like I don't know, like Saint Peter, like here's everything you did. Here's everything you did in life that is a sin to us. And you'd have members still be in and they'd see people leave and they'd see all that junk. And so that just builds the wall higher for them. It's like, oh well, I can't be that person. And I think that was partially by design, right? It creates
who's design?
the culture. I
Oh
mean, it's
yeah,
like it's not a coincidence that it was such a diverse set of experiences, like that so many people in so many different offices had that exact same experience. So it's not like, oh, this local did that and this local over here were saints and they never did that, right? There's different people, right? Because some people would leave and they'd still feel comfortable talking to people. I was one of those people, right? People would reach back to me and I'm like, for the most part, I try to not judge and like, okay, you're a person, whatever. Like, and realize I brought it up, I think last episode and with Chance, like a lot of times people would sever ties with their family or friends, right? I have an interview that is yet to air because it requires some special handling, but people living in cars, people like quasi homeless for a while because
Mm.
they burned their bridges from their past life, and we as an organization burned our bridges with them. Like it would be unthinkable for someone to leave and then come back and stay with us for like a couple weeks or something to get on their feet. That's like, no, you're dead to us. Screw you. Right. And that I don't know if that's still the case. I'm not, I don't know. Right. I would hope they would be better with that, but I kind of doubt it. And that's more like on the organizational side because it's people are people. But we did have those barriers. We didn't, I think a lot of the shortcomings were from the organizational perspective, like the hierarchy, how we made decisions, lack of training, lack of development, lack of like exit policy. And it became because of so much of it was tinged with the moral question, right or wrong. I think that I'm highlighting the wrong side of it, I think, the negative, the problematic side. Um, so yeah, it is a little bit biased, but I think that was an issue for sure. And I've heard that a lot of people have a lot of variations of what I'm saying right there.
Right.
So I don't know, for an organization of people, I hope they've updated. I hope they've brought in new software, mental software to say like this is not a good way to operate, right? Um, Hopefully they have if they're listening. It's something they should change.
Well, yeah, I mean, I look at it like I was always listening to Lynn
Yeah,
as like the authority. I came here in the movement for Lynn, and anybody else, um, I would kind of like, what does Lynn say? You know,
sure,
uh, and so even though they might have like a position of authority or something like that, I tried to say, well, how does that um, fit in with the philosophical idea? How does it fit in with what Lynn is publicly saying, or what is he saying internally in the meetings that are not public but internal? Um, and Lynn would often say that this he has problem with some of his with the organization,
sure,
and I would always like my ears would always perk up when I heard that kind of talk, and I was like, what does it mean when your name is on the movement's label, whatever. Your name is the movement's name,
yeah,
the LaRouche Movement, but you've been in prison, let's say you've been away for a few years,
hmm
and now you're coming back, and some people have jockeyed for power, and they're running the show,
hmm
but you disagree with them. Let's say you're Lynn and you see these people and you disagree with them. Like, how do you clean up the thing when the whole country is always in crisis too, and you're always writing papers that are 40 pages long. And
sure.
it's in that sense, the idea of like how did Plato manage this? How did Socrates manage this?
I think,
Because
yeah.
the point is, I'm referring to like LaRouche never said we're gonna write the rules of the movement purposefully.
Yeah, I think I get what you're saying, and you make a very good point, and I agree with a lot of what you're saying. Um, I'm on a little bit of the other side of that one because, you bring up a very ironic point too, and I think people that were in they saw this, right? Like individuals doing something like, wait, Lynn wouldn't want you to do that, or like individuals doing something because they think it's what Lynn would want, but it's really like, wait a minute, like bizarro world, like treating people like undignified serfs, excuse me, like little worker
Yeah.
serfs, right? Or just people that don't have their own responsibility or capacity to have creative thought. And that's a good point for sure. What I saw, I guess maybe like a channel of that thought is like reading The Organization Man or White Collar, some of the things that he'd reference, and I would read it and think like, wait a minute, like we're not incorporating the lessons of this book at all. And like that was like the only thing that was close to sort of like a a business kind of like organizational book, like a book you might find for like how organizations can function better or like businesses. Because I think we made the mistake of thinking, oh, our problems are unique to our group, right? But I think our problems were in so many ways very, very similar to a group of our size and scope of organization, right? So like I think a lot of the membership and elected leadership would revert to kind of what you're saying about like, well, we got to think about this deeply. It's like, well, yes, but also like if you have, let's say, deputies who are doing so, who are like taking the wrong message or going on their own path, right, in a bad way, like an organization of like several hundred people with a president and board of directors, like there's a way you can handle that. It's like it's a solvable problem if you just realize that the problems aren't unique to the organization. They're problems of an organization of that scale. And we never the line was, oh well that's blocked practical thinking. You need to focus on the ideas. Like, sure, but like the organization's breaking down because of some problems of hierarchy of organization, of deputies doing their own thing in a bad way. Like, there's a long list, and the thinking was always like to poo-poo that kind of thing. Oh, that's what everyone else. That's what the mainlanders do. That's what the mainstream of society. We're not them. We're unique. We're over here in our own like basket of issues. And so I think so. Yeah, respectfully, I'm on the other side of that one because I think a lot of those things, sure, like Lynn as deputy is doing things, but it really like he's the one responsible. And he did have some legal limitations in the early days as a result of his incarceration. At least that's what they said. I assume that's true. And they say that like, the first thing he really did once he got control of his organization again, because he could run it, was to create the youth movement to kind of be this new rejuvenating force, which sure, I buy that part. But a lot of it also is like who's in charge? Like in the military, like the commanding officer is the one ultimately responsible for all those problems because they have the power to run things. And a lot of the failures, I think, are just the failures of organization. They they
Well,
ne- they never took responsibility for those things.
I take this example of obviously I was in Montreal and there was a company which was incorporated or chartered in Canada that was like overseeing the youth movement in Montreal.
Sure,
And and there was another, I think there was like five or six companies registered in the States. And technically those are the 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 legalized, institutionalized roles and responsibilities with the budgeting and the
sure.
legal requirements. So I don't know. I never knew, and there wasn't much discussion about how this is organized. And I don't know what role Lynn had in those organizations, or if they were local organizations being run on their own, but um, tuning in to Lynn for guidance, whatever.
Sure.
I don't know. So there's a lot of things I don't know, and I'm willing to accept that I can put a bit of what you're saying in my glass, like
Sure.
I can put water in my wine.
Mhm.
And I can see both, like there's a lot of ways to look at this. I don't think there's binary
Yeah, yeah,
ways to look at this.
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I think, yeah, I know. I'm just trying to bring my perspective to it as well, because you just kind of like brought it to the surface. But I think not to be like too down on them, but like, and like I left 2016. I was there for 13 years. I was there for the whole youth movement. Youth movement no longer being youth, right? Um, but I think that one of the testaments to the lack of organizational discipline, to the like lack of it being an organized system, and by that I mean like developing into better systems too, is that like not that long after Lynn's death, they had a civil war. And they split into two. So that tells me I mean, that's not a lot of ways to interpret that positively as like, oh, they've like because they didn't have a plan, right? I think there was a hope in the early days that some of the leading youth members would sort of take over. Some like there was like an executive committee or something. Um, for a while they had the candidates were like maybe that was the thinking with the candidate slate, like the you're making like a new board of directors kind of thing, or the basement, which is our scientific research team. But a lot of it they left and that sort of broke up. But like to me, and like I've put out before, anyone's welcome to come on. People that are still current in the organization, they come on that share their side. Maybe there's like a way they can reconcile. That's not my goal. I have it as a question. Is it possible? I am guessing the answer is no from both sides.
Why?
I mean, you have some of the smartest people you ever met. Lynn's death, not that long after, have like,
Yeah, but this could be temporary, no?
so at least one side sued the other side,
Yeah.
um, to get the names. And it seems like there's enough overlap. And my point is like, some of the smartest people you ever met made the decision, probably not hastily, probably over some medium length of time, that they can't even like be in the same company, same legal distinctions as these people. And like maybe they're working parallel, but like they made the choice to split, right? Maybe I mean, sure, it's full of people, right? So who knows? But to me, that speaks more to like the fact that they just did not have a plan. And things were held together for the most part when Lynn was alive. There was a period of his ill health where he was taken out of it, where it did not function very well. There's also some other stuff going on at the time. But to me, that speaks to an organization that's disorganized. I'm not trying to be super critical. I'm just like from an outside observer.
Yeah.
It's hard to argue. I don't. I would love to see the other. I'd love for someone to come on and prove me wrong. Show me the other side. I'd love to have. I mean, it'd be fun to have representatives from each group on, kind of share their side of why it's split. Again, it's a little bit beyond the scope of my. It's not my time. Um, I think maybe our viewers would find it interesting, and I don't necessarily care too much. It's just more of like a curiosity. What you guys split, okay? And I've talked to people that are still active on both sides. Um, I don't think anyone loves it. I don't think like it's great. But one side sued the other and said you can't even use the name of this person, right? Like, okay, that seems pretty harsh. Like if you have an amicable divorce, you don't like sue the other one, you know?
Right.
I don't
Yeah,
know.
I don't think I agree with everything that the way like I obviously I wasn't part of the discussion. I was not part of the
Sure,
movement by any means at that time. Uh Lynn's passing was, I mean, in a way it's lawful that you would have something happen once Lynn is no more because
sure,
he was the uniting force. He was but he was also warning that you might not have the United States if you don't do these changes that weren't made.
sure,
And you're who and like you look at the whole way the world is being reorganized. Like if you take the again the philosophical concept of organization, I mean Lynn was driving at a philosophical graduation of humanity from adolescence to adulthood.
sure.
In all his messages or in his writings, he was preparing something for what was to be.
Hmm.
And there was a possibility that the United States, as we had known it, was going to cease to exist as we had known it.
Sure.
And in a way, you could look at many examples, such as 9/11, for example, cases where it's questionable that do we still have the United States the way is it does it belong to the people? This country is it been taken over, right?
Gotcha.
Because because now you have the leadership still in the organization of humanity is just not United States focused or centric. I mean, I would say, well, look at the Chinese role and the Russian role, and like there's the ideas are going to be there for humanity to survive, but not if you're irresponsible with the ideas. Or what if not if you don't do what you need to do? And I guess I'm using this as a way to say, well, an organization splitting is an effect
Uh-huh.
of maybe a higher principle. And maybe if there is uh, problems with the people that were tasked with dealing with the continuity of this movement, maybe they had moral failings. I don't know how to pinpoint where to assign the blame, and that's not my purpose.
Sure.
But there's a manifest reality that maybe they weren't cut out to be surviving as a unified organization.
Yeah. No, I see kind of where you're going with that. And that's a that's an optimistic way to look at it, I think. Um, I'm reminded, I forget if I brought this up before, but if I haven't, I'm glad because I wanted to. And this is not to be, not to like, this isn't against individuals. This is just like, because the people, my friends that are still in the organization, I wish them well. I wish them well. I hope they attain their goals. I don't wish ill on anybody. I really don't. I've tried to like reflect on my own and, forgive others, forgive myself for transgressions. I've reached out to people that I felt I'd wronged and have tried to like reconcile, and I've done a pretty good job from what I remember of all that for the people that have been able to. And people are people. Like you grow and you develop, and a lot of people just move on from that period of their life. Some people don't even really want to think about it, which is totally fair. Like, so I don't. So what I'm about to say, like, I don't mean is like a anything against anybody, but more like the situation, right? The situation from Lynn's death and the that civil war that happened. But do you remember the Monty Python movie Life of Brian?
Partly.
Okay, it's a fun one. It's this guy who like they think is Christ, but he's not. He's just this guy. But so the Roman Empire, right? And he's at this, I think he's at the Colosseum and the like, a gladiator show or something, and he meets the Jewish resistance. Do you remember this scene? I don't know. I'll put a note to link it because it's kind of an obscure joke, and I don't know how many of my audiences are going to be familiar with it. But Brian is trying to join this resistance, and they're the People's Front of Judea, and they're like, oh yeah, we hate the Romans. We're just trying to overthrow the system, and they said the only people we hate more than the Romans is the Judean People's Front, the other side, and like they're like four people in this huge coliseum, right? And it's like it's a funny little visual of it. Like, and this the Judean People's Front, he's down there. It's just one guy. It's just one guy sitting by himself. And I forget what they call him. Splitter. Yeah, he's Splitter. And like it's like those people couldn't get together. Like they couldn't resolve their differences. And we saw it, I saw it in my time with all the socialist groups. There was like when I was in Seattle, there's like 20 socialist groups in Seattle. It's like you mean to tell me you guys can't get on the same page? Like they'd be at the same rallies and stuff, but like you really can't combine your forces to have a larger effect. And it's not to say that they like, couldn't be their own lane, but to me, it's just more a shame. And that the active members that I still speak with, they from what they were saying to me, and it's not like everyone's experience, but that's the experience that I've received from the people that have talked to me is like they think it's a shame. It's a shame that it
It
happened
is
the
a
way it did.
shame.
It's a shame to happen the way it did. But to me, it speaks to more like, okay, there was just never a plan. There was never a plan. And it was like, not only was there never a plan, but it was like poo-pooed. It's like, oh, that's just the wrong way of thinking. Why even think about that? It's like, well, Lynn's in his 90s. How long do you think this is going to go? You think he's going to be 150? Like where does it stop? And like when he dies, that's it. So again, not to like beat a dead horse, but it's funny, and it reminds me of that clip from the Life of Brian. The only people we
Oh,
hate more than the Romans are the Judean People's Front. We hate them, and I don't think it's at the point of animosity with those groups.
no.
I don't think so. It's more, it's like we're working in parallel, but they do have differences.
Yeah. What do you think those differences are?
I don't really know too much. I mean, part of it I think was what you were alluding to about one of them. It looks more towards the multipolar world, right? A world beyond U.S. hegemony, which is more like, the BRICS countries, China, Russia, India, um, like development with moving beyond U.S. as the prime mover. That seems to be one difference. It seems like the other group's much more U.S. centric, and the U.S. reclaiming, well, like in a sense. And again, maybe you can tell me more. Uh, I'm a very casual observer of this. That's just my very casual observance of the differences. The one looks to a multipolar world and is a little more cynical about the U.S. reclaiming some good policies. And the other side is more, we need the US to reclaim its prominent role in development around the world. That seems to be, and some of that centers around Trump. This group's a little more pro-Trump. This one's a little more cynical or pessimistic about Trump. That's just, again, that's broad strokes, very casual. The groups can come on and tell me what the difference is and if they think it's irreconcilable, right, from their perspective. We could have a debate. That'd be fun. I think it'd be interesting. And again, I'm hopefully this is episode 6. Hopefully my audience, especially those that are still in, can see that I'm not out to get anybody or like I'm against their aims or something. I'm more trying to chronicle this, and look at this question. So yeah, for what that's worth. But do you have anything to add?
Well, I think the only thing I would uh, talk about was COVID.
Ah, okay.
That that seemed to be another one of those
Dividing lines.
polemics. Yeah, I think
Okay.
there was different approaches
Okay.
to the crisis or the world experience we collectively went through.
Sure.
And yeah, so I can see and at sometimes I'm at a position where I can pick and choose what I like because I'm not formally a member of either.
Sure.
But I'm also in that position where I'm able to see that uh maybe like we're all part of the same family of LaRouche ideas, let's say.
Sure.
And the thing is, some people are having a fight right now. They're having a contentious argument.
Okay.
But people have contentious like have you been in family meetings in the last 40 years?
Yeah, I know. Right.
Uh, so the yeah, I thought I think maybe I got it wrong, but I think they're called Prometheus Pact now.
Sure. Yeah. Hmm.
They were more inclined to support the individual freedom to not be forced to be
Vaccinated.
yeah.
Gotcha.
And the other TLO or the
Yeah.
Chiller Institute,
Sure.
they kind of were closer to, well, like the Chinese would look at it like we're all doing this for the greater good and just do like the rest of us
Gotcha.
who are
Wow.
doing it for the greater good.
That's interesting. I didn't realize that. I wasn't really following them at that time, but that's interesting. That's interesting. That was a fault line, you could say. Um, I wonder if they still feel that way. Um, I mean, I imagine it's not something that comes up with them very often in the sense that it's not really
No,
that current political
no,
anymore. And they're not neither side or back when it was one unified whole, we weren't generally in the habit of like going back and like admitting mistakes, like
no.
right or wrong. So it is what it is.
Oh, Lynn
Uh,
would say about that. He would like. I don't apologize or whatever. Like he doesn't have to say he's sorry or he was wrong or something like that. Like
Sure,
he kind of rationalized this idea a few times, I think,
sure,
even though he would say that he's not uh infallible or
sure,
like not making mistakes, many of them maybe, but like he admitted his mistakes in that large sense,
sure,
but not necessarily going back and like, that thing I said, turns out I was wrong.
sure. That's interesting. I get makes perfect sense that the COVID would be the a fault line, but I wonder if TLO has gone back in light of all of the evidence about the efficacy of the vaccine, if they've gone back and rethought their position. I'll leave it at that. If they've rethought their position, I kind of doubt it, but that'd be
Well,
cynical.
each each person in the organization are individuals. We can't forget that, right?
Sure, but
Uh,
but you still have overall policies, so you still have overall
well,
positions.
are they policies or are they like a loud voice or a more prominent voice speaks without it being necessarily the policy? But if it doesn't get challenged, it becomes like a chronicled fact, like
Sure.
this was said and nobody reacted, therefore it must be true.
What you permit, you promote. Yeah, I mean I think there's a couple ways to think about that one because like you do have like overall policies, right? Like you do have that, but then you have a level of like an individual local or like personnel policy. Those can be more um atomized or more small scale interactions. But I don't know. And again, I'm speaking out of ignorance on this because I don't know what either group said about that. And I don't even again care too much. It's just more like a curiosity that sparked of like, okay, I wonder with COVID, because people had very strong views of COVID at the time, right? People still do. And it's more a general question of like, just since the data have been released and not like you can go
Well,
back,
the data can be released, but doesn't mean people are aware of the data.
giving them the benefit of the doubt. I don't think they would go back to them. It's like it's in the past and it doesn't even matter, right? But more thinking of like with the data that's come out about like the lack of effectiveness of the COVID vaccine, if that was such a big fault, would they reconsider their position? And I think the faults are beyond that now, right? But like that seems like almost like an easy win, Like, hey, let's go back and realize that the things we were being told were not correct. There's a lot of deception involved. Um, so could that be something they could reconcile? That's more my broad broad stroke question of curiosity for them. And that's for that one side. And again, I'm going off what you said. That this is news to me, so um, interesting that's a fault line. But if that was the first one, but I think there's deeper stuff. I think there's deeper
Yeah, yeah,
stuff.
yeah. Yeah, there's a lot of
So
other things.
so yeah, yeah, and that's maybe those things are irreconcilable. I don't know.
Yeah. It's you realize like a lot of the movement is who are the members of the movement.
Sure.
Because like I say, like the example of Bruce to me was the movement.
Oh, okay.
Uh
'Cause he came up there
eh,
all the time, right?
yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
And he would teach us about the
Riemann.
second law of thermodynamics,
Sure.
and that there is no such law. Um,
It's a postulate more so.
yeah.
They say, yeah, right.
And so and he would be like the person, like the guy we would interface with to like get the connection to Lynn, right? Like he would tell us, "Oh, Lynn's writing a paper," and then uh I read it, and here's how it like what it means, what's important, or
Sure.
he's basically the messenger in a way. And but
Hmm.
now he's in one of the organizations. I gotta say,
Right.
I miss Bruce.
Okay.
Hey, Bruce, if you're out there, send me an email. Yeah,
Sure.
I can't find your email. Yeah,
Yeah.
but yeah, I think that in that sense, it's sad because I've been more following the actions of like Diane Sayre and like Helga and Harley, right?
Uh-huh.
Um, and Jose Vega.
Sure.
That's the people I'm more following.
Right.
It resonates more with me today.
Okay.
Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah. Yeah. And again, like, because I ran into both sides at a rally recently. And then I ran into one of the sides at a card table in a little town not far from me. Like, oh, hey, what's up? And I talked to him. And we had a night. There's two people I had never met before. And one of them I knew the name, but the other one I didn't. But it was pleasant and all that, for what it was. But yeah, and of course, the focus of the show is more on the history of it than the current day, right? That's more of what it is. And part of that comes from, having left the organization and being in the Navy in my case, and you know,
When did you leave?
2016. Yeah.
Had you
And
been like close in the inner circle with Lynn at that time?
yeah, well, I worked in Percival, so I was about as close as you can get. I mean, I wasn't there's all kinds of layers, like Palace Guard kind of stuff. But that stuff
What was
never
that? What was that you said?
Palace Guard,
Palace. Oh, okay.
Palace, yeah, like Downton Abbey, like just getting close to the person. Um, and I
So
never,
have you had FaceTime with him, like
oh
mano
yeah,
a mano
yeah.
sometimes?
We spoke on the phone a bunch. Yeah, yeah. No, I was one of his main filmmakers. Like I helped run his studio. Um, yeah, I would call him if I had questions. Like I dinner with him countless times, just like a lot of people in that office at that time. I was at his house many, many times a week, and like I said, dinner at his place many times a week. So
Like
yeah,
with
I
the
mean,
group, with
yeah,
the
with the group.
group.
But like
Yeah.
sometimes I like sit right next to him and talk about whatever. Like he knew me personally, and we knew each other, and like I said, we talked on the phone many times. Um, no, like yeah, more on like the creative stuff because I was running films for him, and he liked some of my films and some of them he didn't. I mean, it is what it was. Um, no, I would say I was quite close to him. Yeah,
Yeah. I gotta say that being in Montreal, there was a time when the movies or the documentaries started coming out, like, and we
yeah,
were like all like this was the main thrust of the organization.
yeah,
And for me, because I had become like the technical person of the office, like I bought a projector,
sure.
I was setting up for all the webcasts.
Hmm.
Um, some other people were helping out, but I mean, this was like I had a niche role, I guess I had
Sure,
developed. And the video had been something I had in mind, as in a passion of cinematography. Like I could see like a cameras. Okay, well, what if you did a movie? What if you did a scene that explains organizing, And then I was like trying to find ways like, how do you get to Purcellville? Like I want to be
uh-huh.
there.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
But it was not so easy because obviously I thought maybe everybody wanted to be there. Uh,
So, yeah, there's a lot of sides to it. I mean, you saw my discussion with Chance, did you?
yeah.
Oh yeah, so we talked about it because he and I were kind of core members for a while there. Um, and I've talked to, I mean, so yeah, in a certain way, that was a thrust. People did want to be there because in a lot of ways, we were the center of the youth movement in a way, in terms of like ideas and products, media products. Um, we were running the website. I mean, like I designed the website that we had forever. I didn't build it, but I like designed it. I designed like the concept of it.
In Photoshop.
Yeah, but more, and I have a couple videos I might release later, like old videos where like I kind of go through. They were like for internal use, but like describing how we incorporated the lead concept into like the nature of the website. We tried to, um, and that was a website for a long time. But there's a positive side to it, and then another friend who wants to be anonymous has brought up like, well, he brought up in the thing I read at the beginning of George's video, which you haven't seen, but he talks about how like uh, his view, and this is like sort of the other side of the view, is like we became more like internally focused in terms of like everyone wanted to go to Percival to do more of those things to like as a way to get away from organizing, which I can see that too. I know like I originally was part of the War Room, um, which is the youth center for like coordinating our overall political activities, and it was meant to be an adjunct to our functions of EIR, which is political intelligence. So we kind of did both, and then um, so the War Room kept going, and then we developed this new set called the editorial team, which is doing more of the videos and
Off the
I,
cuff, remember that?
off the cuff. Yep, yep,
Ed Hamler, or sorry,
and yep, Ed Handler. Yep. Um, and um,
sorry, threw
no,
you off
no,
there.
no, it's you did. It's okay. Give me a sec. Yeah, I was gonna say.
Editorial,
I got it. I was gonna say like I was part of the initial team from the War, but then I went back to our offices. I think I was at Percival a couple times because I was, yeah, well, okay, I remembered it. So I was part of the War Room originally. Then I went back to our office because the line was, and this is what I believed at the time, was like, well, this is nice, but this isn't real organizing. Let me be back in the field. That's the real deal. It's the real blue collar political organizing. So I went back
that's
and
what you were telling yourself, or some people were telling you?
both,
Yeah.
both. It was for sure a line. And that was partially it's a new thing and it's seen as like this almost like necessary overhead, right? Because and that's the thing. If it has Lynn's stamp of approval, then you get a lot of leeway. Because like, well, Lynn says to do this. Like sure, but maybe not as many people going there as they would. But then they released the Firewall film, which is our first major film, Firewall in Defense of the Nation State. You can see that online. Pretty good film for sure. That was around the Homeowners Bank Protection Act and that was building into the Glass-Steagall fight a little bit later. Um, and then they asked me to come on board to help them to produce 1932, which is like kind of like our bigger, more I think it's still kind of like the flagship film of that company. Still holds up, I think. I think I might do like a commentary little section, do like little audio commentary for just as a fun little thing
Sure.
because there's some cool stories from that. But they brought me on, and I had no real experience with film other than being like a lover of film. But they're like, "Oh, Spen's creative, so and he knows about FDR and World War II, so bring him on." That really was like I think the argument. Um, so I ended up,
Why We Fight. You did that too, no?
I did Why We Fight. Thank you. Yes, thank you. Yes, I'm very proud of that one. I do like that one. Outside of some of the little like time specific political points I throw in there, which didn't age quite well. But overall, I like that the composition. But yeah, and then after 1932, because that was just like 5 weeks. But then I hung around Percival for a little bit longer. But I was like, oh, I got to go back to the field office, whatever, right? And so that's
Which was your local at that time?
Seattle was my main local
Yeah.
for the most part. But I worked in almost every local in the U.S. For different periods of time. Um, and then I think it was around the Alice project, which Chance and I talked about. I was helping remotely, but not a lot. Like me and a couple good friends, Ken and Juliet, we like wrote the theme song, and then I wrote some scripts for them. But like I wasn't there in person, so it was a bad project, and it was a little mismanaged. And Chance had a better view because he was there. But then they asked me to come back. No, they asked me to help on Rachel's campaign.
Oh yeah. Rachel
Yeah,
Brown.
yeah, Rachel Brown. So I did that, and then um, I ended up going back to Percival after that to help. Kind of like they wanted to expand the film department, so I was doing that. And yeah, we made the 1989 films. Um, yeah, those are funny. Um, yeah, so that was kind of my story with that. Yeah, but it
Remember
was good.
John Hofel
John
and
Hopeful,
they had
the
the
weekly
meetings
show.
with LaRouche with the
Mhm.
big table and people around the table.
Yep.
That was a phase like because there's been different kind of like formats for the webcasts for a while,
Hmm.
but the discussions with the youth, I don't know how you see the separation between the webcast versus the film. How would you like
Well,
understand it?
I talked about it in one of those videos because um it first started with, I mean, Jeff would just do the Saturday briefing leads, and then at a certain point he would just write them, right? So we had for our audience, we had daily written briefings sent to members, and it was just like political news. And you can actually subscribe if you guys are curious. You can see what it is.
EIR
Um,
alerts or like
EIR alerts, yep.
oh
Executive
wow.
intelligence reviews. Um, yeah, but then Jeff started doing an audio recording of it, and then just like so people could have it and listen in their cars. And then he started video recording it. And then I was there and at the Warren at the time, and this one guy, I won't say his name, but he started adding images to it, and it became like some of the first webcasts from that. Not the full-on ones where we would do like we'd rent a conference hall and like do a big broadcast, but just became this regular series. Um, and then at a certain point, John Hopeful started joining, and then Lynn joined, and then it eventually just became Lynn. It became Lynn's weekly. So like I was there for kind of all steps of that process. Um, so it was interesting, and I used it in this lecture series I did about the relationship of text and film and such, because originally, and it was good. It was just Jeff was just really reading what he wrote, and what he wrote was good and interesting, but it wasn't really like a film. In the early days,
No.
we're adding images to this thing, trying to make it more filmic, but like that's
It's a
really,
slideshow edition on top.
yeah, you're not adding any dimension to it. You're just like showing people the things he's talking about, which is interesting, but not that. And so my class is more like why film? And at the end, because I was always trying to reform, especially my last years,
Sorry, was this a class you made to the basement team or
I have it recorded, and I probably will release it later as like part of this series. But they were internal classes, just like I put them. We used to have an internal website, and so I shared it because I was active on our internal website because I was trying to reform the organization. I was like, we can improve these things. And the last class I gave, like right when I was just pretty much on my way out, was like why we should stop making films.
oh,
We should stop making films until we can make actual films that are films and not
right.
just have audio and visual things together because that's not what it is. And so I had a lot of examples of it, and I'll release it because I think it's interesting enough. It's interesting enough topic, and it's evidence of like I was trying to reform things. I was trying to like
You're a reformer.
I was a
Yeah,
reformer. Yeah, I was a reformer. Like
from inside.
yeah, let's make it better. I genuinely tried. Um, and it was kind of getting back to the earlier question is like it actually was one of those things where like it almost wasn't possible to reform because we didn't have the structure to really incorporate it. There wasn't like, and it didn't need to necessarily be hierarchical, like, oh, this person will do it, but we didn't have those levels of authority. You'd be like, okay, yeah, we should change that. Like, who can do it? You
Who has the
can't.
power
You
to make the
can't.
call?
Sure. And so that also speaks to the lack of integrity, not like moral integrity, but just like structural integrity of the organization at the time that I saw. And maybe it's different now, but that's what I saw. And that's from the perspective of a reformer. It's like I want this thing to work. I want this thing to get better. But as I saw it at the time, I was like, there's all kinds of reasons why this isn't going to work, and it seems like no one's looking at it. So
Yeah, because there's a transformation that's happening. If you look at it in hindsight, um, we were on the streets. That's where people were.
yeah,
People were readers. It was text. People knew how to read. That's why there's a distinction between the boomer organizers and the more youth movement later on, because I think partly they've been brought up to read everything, and that's your audience. But then you have a new audience who are like, wouldn't it be cool if I could see something at the same time? Like I'm seeing images like you're not like let's share those what we think about when we like let's invoke something poetic in the images or let's dramatize something. Let's
Yeah.
yeah. So there's the visual and then the multimedia, I guess, split.
Hmm.
And but the thing is, the 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 traditional organizing on the streets is something 3D. Like you're in the game. Like you're
Sure.
somebody's really like you said, you got knocked out on your head or something. Like this is real life, you know?
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's intense and it gets like you're really meeting the person where they're at and you're like they can't hide from you. Either they're serious or they're not.
Sure.
But then when you go into the multimedia, there's like a new reality,
Hmm.
but this became the new place where people are today.
Yeah.
People are wherever they are and they're tuning in to whatever they are onto. Like they're it changes, uh, but the people are not reading,
Yeah.
or it's hard for people to find the time to read, even for me. I mean, I think I have a lot of time I could read, but there's a lot of solicitation by what's going on in the world. Many more changes happening per day than before.
Yeah. Sure.
And
Fair
so the
enough.
frequency has increased. And so the production needed to do multimedia work takes a lot of time to.
Hmm.
And so that's why I think the webcast format worked, or the discussion format, which is the podcast format.
Sure.
It's because you don't have time to edit it and like write it and like get the approvals and get everything
Sure.
going.
Yeah. Yeah. Part of it was like, because I helped run our social media stuff for a while too, and I was trying to advocate. I did advocate for like we need a little bit more freedom with this. Like we need to be we can't just like put out a statement on our website and then also put out the same statement in these other like they were viewing it from the traditional lens. And it was like, no, like Twitter at the time was like it needs to be more playful, maybe a little combative, a little bit more short term.
Meme
Yeah, like
culture.
this, and this is before the memes culture was big. It really was like before that, but it was more like it needs to be less conventional. Like it just as one example, but there was like a real like no, it has to be all approved and sanctioned. You're like we're missing the boat. We're missing the boat. We don't have the flexibility and the resilience and like the adaptability is a better word. Um, to incorporate these new avenues, which should be new avenues for our message, but we're too stolid in our thinking. And maybe it's better now. Like I've seen some of the stuff. That guy Vega has got some funny stuff, like okay,
Yeah.
like it's
Yeah.
interesting, and his audience is younger for sure, the New York crowd, and like, good for them, good for them for doing that. That's cool. But even like for a long time, we're like, well, we have to call people on the phone. We're like, but people won't pick up their phones. So like, okay, how do you adapt? Like, could we adapt? Like, is it even possible to adapt? We tried different technological solutions. I don't know. Maybe they worked. I don't know. They didn't when I was in. They were like trying to get them working, but I don't know. I
What do
don't
you
know.
mean by other solutions you tried?
I don't want to go into specifics because it's like I don't want to dime them out. Um, but they were trying different technological things to reach people in different ways. And yeah, again, I'm not trying to dime them out, because maybe that's working for them and whatever. But my experience was we didn't have some of it's like we just couldn't even. It wasn't going to work, and like it wasn't clear how it would even if they wanted to. But
Mm.
we never got to that point because like the feedback I would give is like, sure, you're bringing up a lot of good things that are actual issues, but we don't have the time. It's not a priority. Yada 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 yada. All these reasons why whatever it wouldn't work. And it's like, all right, well, if we don't make some of the changes that I'm bringing up, like we're gonna fail. We're gonna fail more and more. And like if you don't deal with the long-term thing, at some point, it's gonna really kill you. So I feel like I tried, you know. Um, what are you gonna do? Like you can only advise. at a certain point, like
Okay.
I wasn't running the show, but what are you gonna do?
But yeah, I just don't think like you should despair because there's a reflection of the movement that's been that influenced the I think the general culture out there in the States, the discussions that are happening all over the internet. There's there's something that has been we the Kindle has been lit by this movement, right?
Okay.
The that there's been a transformation. Maybe there's a change in how it's manifesting the influence of the movement.
Hmm.
And I think there's it's not it's, we're not like the world is not ended yet. We haven't been nuked yet, you know.
Sure.
We still have a moment in time to intervene in.
Hmm.
We have a new reality where all of a sudden somebody can be from unknown to like explode and be presented to like somebody who has 100,000 person audience or a million person audience, and you have this phenomenon where we're getting introduced to new people all the time.
Hmm.
For those that are seeking the information or the actors, we're looking who is saying something interesting in the world. And
Yeah.
we have this independent kind of circuit now that somebody can leverage. And I mean, it's not being done perfectly because, like, for people who see the future, we're late. You know, we already want to be there.
Sure. Yeah, I don't
But
sorry, I don't mean to interrupt. I was
well,
say
you feel free.
sure. I was say I don't despair overall. I brought up in a previous episode this book, Enlightenment Now by Steven Pinker, and he's just laying out it's a really good and there's a good I think there's a an X or Twitter page associated where it's just looking at like all the positive things going on around the planet, right? I mean, childhood mortality is like approaching zero, right? Extreme poverty is basically zero now. There's still poverty, but like extreme poverty is like zero, which is phenomenal. Like that's a huge win for mankind, right? Probably the first time in history that that's we're there, you know? Um, life expectancy, like there's so many good things for sure. My despair was only in reference to the lack of the organization at the time, and maybe it's changed, but to adapt and develop into a better form. I'm gonna sneeze. Hold on.
Hmm.
Excuse me. That's all it was. And like again, like I've moved on with my life. Um, I've enough of a drive uh developed within me to do this show because I think it's, if nothing else, it's interesting stories. And like I think that from what I could tell, the stories of the youth movement were kind of fading away. And they weren't told in one, like I couldn't find either website history. Like who's Lynn? What do you do? Like, there's so much there, and I brought that up when I was in. It's like, where is it? Like we're not capitalizing on these great things they did, and there's problems too. And like that's the whole thing of this show is like both sides. The beauty with the warts, because it's part of it. Yeah, like I said, like the other podcasters or whatever, news articles, they're just cynical. They're very low resolution. They're very surface level, and they don't really understand what they're talking about for the most part. And then the histories that did exist with the organization were all just very like sunshine and rainbows. We're the greatest. Like, okay, you did accomplish some great things, but let's talk, let's give the full history, And that's really where I'm coming from.
Well, I think there's so many discussions that even though like you have brilliant people all over the world speaking in podcasts and everything, there's still so much that is not being exploited. Like
Sure.
there's a lot of terrain which is not being discussed or deep enough.
Hmm.
But what I like about this format is that uh, let's forget for a second about the failures of the movement or things we don't like of what happened since Lynn passed away.
Uh-huh.
But the thing is, we have an organization which is international, and we have these people that are now more and more in front of the computers. or able to be so. But the thing is, we never knew the movement in its entirety. Like it's not like we had like presentations from each local and meet all the members each week or each day or whatever.
Yeah.
But the thing is, when you get a chance to meet the people, that's a whole lot of guests you can have on your show, for example, for you.
Hmm.
But anybody can replicate this format in a sense. You just talk to people,
Sure.
and it's if its members can do it amongst themselves. It's not. I mean, assuming it's not against a dogma of the movement, you are generating interest in your organization
Hmm.
when you manifest what it is to be part of this organization. What is this culture you talk about?
Yeah.
Like, what am I getting if I subscribe to that? Is it
Sure.
I'm gonna be bored to death? Is that what I'm gonna happen?
Yeah. Maybe. Yeah. No, yeah.
But if you're being bored, have you tried intervening? Right?
Hmm. Yeah. No, like I said, like anyone is welcome on the show. Um, yeah, you're the first person that just reached out. Other people, well, that's not true. But yeah, happy to have them.
Actually, did I ask to be on the show, or did I say, "How's it going?" Blah blah blah. Did I don't know. I don't re recall
Maybe
asking, but
maybe I proposed it. Oh yeah, okay. I stand corrected. I can't remember. But
we'll
you
have to
reached,
look at the transcript.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Let's pull the receipts. No, it's all interesting. Like my focus is somewhat narrow, but also broad enough to incorporate whatever. And I've got enough feedback that it's, people think it has value, which, you're never sure. But like really after the first episode, we're like, yeah, I'm glad you're doing this. I'm like, okay, cool. That's good. It's good to know. And who knows? Maybe I get 10 volunteers and maybe I could never get another one again. So
But I think there is value in the therapeutic aspect of discussing, airing out uh, things that are taboo, you know?
sure. Well, so much of it, I brought this up several times in the previous episodes. Like a lot of people are just fearful of saying anything negative. And so I kind of broached it. I'm like, all right, like I'll tell you what I think. It's not nothing crazy controversial. There's some dirt in there, you know, it's not my place to tell, but other people may want to tell it. Like there's some crazy stuff that happened, and like, that's not my story, but that's someone else's story. So, but a lot of it is therapeutic for people, even for those that don't want to come on, because they get to see someone else talking about it. They get to see someone else speaking it into the world, which maybe they're fearful to say. So yeah, that's, I know for a fact that like, I know I've received some critiques, whatever. It doesn't bug me really that much. But more so getting all the positive feedback from people saying like, I'm so glad you're doing this, and someone had to. And Chance said it, and other people echoed it too, saying like that I'm the best person for it, which is great. It's like not that I'm so great, but just that people know that I'm not coming at it with an agenda. It's just like I'm here to talk to people. So that's
Yeah.
good. That's good. There's a trustworthy. There has to be my audience has to trust that I'm not biased. Like I'm just like if you have something to say, I might push back or something, or I might give the other side, but I'm not bringing you on just because you have some view, or I'm not excluding somebody else because they have a view. It's like anyone's welcome because it's other people point out it's such a broad organization with such broad experiences that like you might have had a totally different experience than someone else in the same local as you in the same years served.
Oh, for
Very,
sure. Yeah.
very different, right? Just for all kinds of reasons, your background, all kinds of reasons. So that's interesting. So like you don't speak for Montreal, you just speak for you in Montreal and wherever else you were. So that's yeah, yeah.
Can I ask, did you like the singing? Did you do singing with Percival or?
I did. So I mean I was a choir leader for a while, in our Seattle office. I love the music part of it. I didn't do as much singing in Percival. There was like a lot of obstacles for it happening regularly. And part of it was my own choices. Um, but part of it did sort of stratify a little bit towards the end of my time there. where like you had the people that were like really good singers, and then like I was never like a great singer. I was a decent conductor, and I like to go deep into the analysis of the music. So I did these whole things like for our audience, we sang classical music. I've talked about the canons before. I think Joanna and I talked about some of the music. But Lynn gave us this project to perform one of these. It's called a motet. It's a type of music, form of music from Johann Sebastian Bach, and the motet was BWV 227. I'm pretty sure. The Jesu Freude. Pretty wonderful piece of music for sure. But I would do like deep analysis of like all the chordal relationships, and I'd take different vocal sections through some of those dissonances and harmonies, how it resolves, and some more of the technical side of it. I thought because I did have a little bit of a background in music, um, growing up in school and such, so like I knew some of that stuff, and I learned a lot of it as part of the movement, really. So I like that part of it. But no, I love the singing. I love the canons. I wrote a lot of canons. Like I said, I wrote the lyrics to the Alice piece, right? Like it was funny because like I volunteer, like, hey, Spen can do this. Like if you need someone to write lyrics, bring Spen. So I was maybe more on that side of it, but no, I love the music. Always did. I performed in the rehearsal before. Remember we had the two Requiem performances. I don't know if you remember those for John for JFK's 50th
JFK.
anniversary. Yeah. So we had one. One was in September for like the actual when he was when they had the ceremony like on his death in DC, and we did the other one in Boston for the 50th when he was brought up there, right? And that was I have a whole actually video on that too. I did like a stand-up comedy bit about my experience. I'll share it eventually because it's funny.
Please do.
It's like a stand-up tragedy, I call it. Um,
Okay.
but for the rehearsal for that one, I played trombone in the rehearsal for the first one. Um, didn't make the final cut because they brought in people that were much better. But no, I did that, and I produced the films for those too. But yeah, I always loved the music, and I brought it before. Someone has a list or like lyrics to all the canons we wrote somewhere, and like I want to get a hold of it. Like that should be shared. That's there's it's too funny, you know.
The guy in Boston, no?
Which guy?
Bill Ferguson
Oh, he might. Yeah, yeah. Interesting.
or
Yeah,
Jenny
maybe.
or
Yeah,
Matt.
yeah, maybe. Yeah. Well, if anyone has them, let me know. I think it should be shared with the world. There's some of them are like very um topical, very timely topical ones, but some of them are just too funny and too
Oh
good.
man, yeah, there was some very excellent ones.
It's another shame that we didn't get like good recordings of all those, over the
Yeah,
years, because
yeah.
it just it's almost lost. Not necessarily lost, but it's almost lost.
Wow.
Yeah.
They
So
should
like
go in studio and get a band going, a motet
I'll,
going.
hey, they could do it. Someone could still do that, and it would still be very valuable for them to do
Yeah.
that. It should be
Or write
part,
some new cannons for
yeah,
attacking or challenging Trump or something that's going to be needed now.
whatever they want. I mean, it should be, and this is in a certain way, this show is like a kind of a challenge to them in a positive way, in a, collegial way of like, why am I the guy to write the history? Like, why is it me? I don't feel obligated. I feel
Well,
like
well,
so.
Lynn would say it's the self-volunteer uh,
Sure,
drive in the movement, right?
sure,
Self-selected individuals.
sure, fair enough. But at the same time, they really should have histories. They really should have, and it should be a multi.
They, who are they?
The people that do it full time. This is a fun little hobby for me. No, and I get your point. You're harkening back to your earlier point. Fair enough. But I don't run their websites. They should have it. It should be theirs. It should be multimedia. They should have a whole thing on cannons. They should have a whole thing with their films. They should have a whole thing on organizing stuff. I mean, it's like, yeah.
Maybe
Anyway,
Trump needs to finance a mobilization movement like this so that we can get our whole thing properly funded, and then you recruit the people that can withstand this kind of like cultural requirement and the thing all it needs is proper funding for it to work, I think, which was lacking sure like sorely. I mean, partly like just having the time to be take like if you have a job and you're paying bills to just to meet stay above water, like you can't just afford to spend all your time creating a musical or some kind of like canon.
So I remember my last period with the organization, they were explicit. Some of Lynn's deputies and Lynn were having the discussion about like, well, almost a thought experiment. What if we did have money? What if we were resourced? And Lynn and these deputies said the same thing. It was like, we wouldn't want it. We wouldn't want it because you wouldn't have the drive. You wouldn't have the necessary drive to do the organizing and the fundraising that you have to do. So that's, I was there. I was like, it like kind of tweaked my head a little bit. Like, what?
Counterintuitive, yeah.
And I get where they're coming from. Like, I understand their reasoning, even if I disagree with it. Because they didn't want it. They wanted the scarcity. They wanted the requirement
Yeah.
to drive to do their activities. So at least at the time, they would disagree with that point. But I get it. I mean, it makes sense, but it's hard to understand, maybe for an outsider.
Yeah. But I mean, we're also dealing with the fact that you want the whole culture to be elevated. Uh, and so that's the difficulty of like you can't just do these beautiful things on your own and like because you like them. I get that. Um, but it is super challenging. This whole universe living today, I think, is very challenging. There's not a
Sure.
day which you're not confronted with either like inner voices or the people you meet on the street or at work or whatever.
Hmm.
It's but it's an exhilarating time to be alive in a way too if you're noticing all that's being transformed very quickly.
Sure. Hmm. Well, I like that point. Has a certain end to it in terms of the discussion. I mean, no, I appreciate your points, Luke. You're seeing it more as a movement of ideas, not of like formal groups, and more of like people as individuals advocating for and organizing and helping to teach different concepts, overall. So there's a beauty to that for sure. For sure.
I mean, the difference between the American culture and the Chinese culture is that the American culture is led by individuals, apparently.
To some, yeah, I could see how you could say that. Yeah.
E pluribus unum. There's like the paradox expressed in that way. I mean, I'm
Hmm.
sure it's expressed in another way or reversed way in China, just to take those two examples. But
Well, that one is almost the opposite though, because it's saying out of many comes one. It's like the total of like us, like the melting pot and the fact that we're the most diverse group, diverse country on the planet, by design. It took a while, but we got there, right? That it's like anyone's welcome, and it's not based on ethnicity or country of origin or so. It's like it's very opposite from, so that a little bit of counterpoint to what you're saying, I guess, counterposition. But yeah,
yeah, I just have in mind that if the people really knew the kind of degeneracy in the leadership right now, and that's what they're coming up, they're waking up to that reality, and they're processing it right now. But once they resolve, I think the American people can express something pretty powerful.
that's a nice thought. Yeah, nice. Well, that again also feels like a nice place to close
Yeah,
the
let's
discussion.
take a break here and thank you for having me.
Yeah. Thank you for coming on, Luke. I appreciate it. And yeah, we'll keep marching on.
Yeah, good luck with your podcast. All the
Thanks.
best.
Thank you very
Have
much.
fun.
Okay.
Happy 2025,
Yes.
everyone.